Welcome back, class. Professor G here again. What I want to do for this lecture is I want to talk about the Neolithic Revolution. And anytime I talk about the Neolithic Revolution, I like to begin with a bit of a thought experiment. Right? Suppose you're walking down the street one day, just minding your own business, strolling along, and all of a sudden somebody snatches you and throws you into a back alley, pulls out a knife, and says, "Quick, tell me what's the most important event in ancient history." What would you say? Right, you may be thinking maybe the fall of Rome, maybe ancient Greece, maybe the Hebrew Bible, right? Economically speaking, as far as the impact on our day-to-day life goes, probably the most important event, and I think a lot of historians would agree with me here, probably the most important event in ancient history would be the Neolithic Revolution. But let me explain why for a second. All right. In order to explain why, we need to dabble a bit in human prehistory, history before we started writing stuff down, before we started building buildings. Touch briefly on the history of human evolution. Okay? So, human beings first appear in sub-Saharan Africa. Oh, and by the way, if you want to go real quick and Google like world map, that would probably help if you want to look at that alongside listening to this. That way you can sort of get an image in your head of where I'm talking about. All right, so human beings first evolved in sub-Saharan Africa. That's Africa below the Sahara. So if you're looking on the map, you see Egypt, northern Africa, and then you have the Sahara below that, sub-Saharan Africa. First evolved in sub-Saharan Africa about 200,000 years ago. Give or take a few thousand years. All right, anywhere, estimates range from 200,000 to 150,000 years ago. Human beings first appear on the plains of sub-Saharan Africa. Around 80,000 years ago, certain geological changes and geographical changes and environmental changes start to happen in Africa. We don't know exactly what. It could be climate change, it could be weather conditions, probably a combination of all of those, which in turn affect the local environment, affects the food supply, affects the species that were living in the area, all of which about 80,000 years ago leads to human beings moving out of Africa via North Africa, right? North Africa to modern day Saudi Arabia to the modern day Middle East. Okay, so about 80,000 years ago, due to environmental changes, human beings move out of Africa. By about 50,000 years ago, human beings start to infiltrate Inner Asia. So we initially start to move along the coast, so from Saudi Arabia to modern day India. By about 50,000 years, we move into China, into the southernmost steppes of Russia. By about 40 to 30,000 years, we've moved into Europe. And beginning about 20,000 years ago, human beings start to migrate into North America. We migrate into North America involving a series of waves. If this was American history, we'd talk more about the different genetic waves. But anyway, by about 20,000 years ago, via the Bering Strait, the little narrow strip of sea that separates Russia from America. So you have Russia and you have Alaska, right? The Bering Strait at that period of time, most scientists believe that it was frozen over. So there's like a land bridge there, an ice bridge, which human beings would have crossed over. And within 1,000 years, we have the population of North America and Central and South America as well. So by about 15,000 years ago, the world has been inhabited by human beings, probably the most successful spread of species in biological history. It's amazing how quickly we spread across the globe. By about 12,000 years ago, another change starts to happen. All right, I forgot to put my dates here. So 200,000 years ago, human beings first evolved in sub-Saharan Africa. By about Anywhere from 80 to 60,000 years ago, you have the migration out of Africa, the leaving of Africa, again, probably due to climate reasons and changes in our geography and our environment. Let's say from 40 to 30,000 years ago, human beings inhabit inland Asia as well as Europe. And by about 20,000 years ago, we've reached, or we're starting to reach, North America. And after North America, Central and South America. Now, beginning around 12,000 years ago, we have a fundamental shift in our basic living conditions. Human beings were, throughout this entire time span, hunters and gatherers, as far as like their day-to-day life goes. Hunters and gatherers, essentially what would happen is the men would go out and hunt for deer, for bison, for mammoth, for whatever sort of big game they happened to be following, while the women stayed in and around the camp and would gather fruits and vegetables, as well as take care of the children. So hunting and gathering lifestyle, this is basically what it entails. It's a nomadic lifestyle, meaning these people were constantly on the move. In fact, this is probably the reason why human beings left Africa to begin with, in search of better food sources, following herds out of Africa, looking for a better place to hunt and to scavenge around. Okay? So hunting and gathering, it's a nomadic lifestyle, moving from one place to the other, constantly in search of a food source, and it's a hand-to-mouth type lifestyle, meaning you got what you eat that day, you gathered your food and you ate it, you didn't really have much left over. And if you did have leftovers, there wasn't a whole lot you could really do with it. Again, they had fire, they had basic preservation as far as that goes, and they could carry like seeds and nuts and fruits with them as they traveled. But it's not like they could store food like we store food today. So for most of human history, from about 200,000 to about 12,000, well, about 15,000, for most of human history, we were hunters and gatherers. We were nomadic peoples, constantly moving around, constantly finding new sources of food. And then a change starts to occur. About 12,000 years ago, a change starts to occur. At different parts across the globe, at roughly the same time, within a few thousand years of each other. In Mesopotamia, people start to realize that they can grow ancient forms of rice or millet, as well as yams and other fruit products. The same goes in China and also in parts of Europe. So this change is brought about essentially by agriculture. Okay, so beginning about 12,000 years ago, we have the Neolithic Revolution. And what the Neolithic Revolution is characterized, it's characterized by two things. The first is the domestication of plants. The first is the domestication of plants, and the second is the domestication of animals. Oops. So the Neolithic Revolution is characterized by the domestication of plants and the domestication of animals. So beginning about 12,000 years ago, people at various spots of the globe, so if you want to bring up your map here, the modern day Middle East, the modern day Iraq and Iran, between the Tigris and Euphrates River is what we call the Fertile Crescent. So the Fertile Crescent, along the Indus River in India, as well as along the Yellow River in China, you have the domestication of plants. So somewhere at around 12,000 years ago, people in these different places got the idea that if they stuck seeds in the ground, that eventually plants would sprout up. That the food that they've been collecting, that the source of that food would sprout up. And so they realized that they could domesticate plants, that they could time it, that they could have a stable and steady food source. And so this appears first in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and India, but it quickly spreads to other regions. Now, as far as we know, it developed independently in these regions. But we also know that some other places, such as Europe, that it was brought to by farmers from the Middle East. And in sub-Saharan Africa, we know that there was trade going on between sub-Saharan Africa and Egypt, as well as sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East as well, the Mesopotamian region. So the Neolithic Revolution occurs at some places independently. In other places, it's brought about by trade. It's brought about by farmers migrating to new lands in search of places to plant. So the Neolithic Revolution, domestication of plants, essentially the beginning of modern day agriculture, planting crops on a cycle, and the domestication of animals. Now, animals were used for many reasons. You have the use of animals as a food source, and you have the use of animals to assist with labor. Right? This is what's known as the secondary products revolution, which is a term you don't need to know. Just know that these animals are used for various reasons, not just food. Right? So think of sheep and goats, for example. Some of the first animals that were domesticated. Right? You can use a sheep for more than one purpose. You can eat it, get some lamb chops going on, or you can use its wool for warmth, for clothing. The same with goats. You can use the goat itself to make some curry goat, or you can use the goat's milk, which you can also use for sustenance, but you don't have to kill the animal. All right? So these are the two primary characteristics, the domestication of plants and the domestication of animals. And this fundamentally changes humanity's day-to-day life, their basic existence. So remember, during this time period, human beings are nomadic. We're traveling from place to place in search of better and better food supplies. Well, with the Neolithic Revolution, human beings start to settle down. Now, this isn't always a permanent settlement. All right, so it's kind of can't really think of it as one day we're just running around in the forest trying to shoot deer with our bow and arrow, and the very next day we're planting crops, right? It happens at different speeds in different places. So you can kind of think of it as a gradual transition. In some places they never, you still have nomadic tribes wandering around. Okay, but the development of agriculture leads to a more settled life. Either a settled life or a semi-nomadic life. Right? We stay in one place now because this is where our crops are. This is where we get our food source from, right? So we're going to stay here, we're going to protect it, and we're going to continue growing our crops. But this changes other aspects as well, right? Nomadic people, for example, don't work as much as people who are farming. Okay? You'll get a bit of this in the article that you're reading, right? It isn't necessarily a change for the good in a lot of instances. Nomadic people on average worked about 4 to 6 hours a day. Farmers work much more than that. Not only do they work more than that, but the work itself is harder. So why the exchange? Right? You exchange a somewhat unstable food supply with a relatively, compared to this, a relatively easy lifestyle for a harder lifestyle, but a stable food supply. But the Neolithic Revolution also does something else. And hopefully I can illustrate this for you really quick. All right, keep in mind I flunked out of art class, so bear with me as far as the drawing goes. All right, so we talked about the dates briefly. So here, 200,000 years ago, you have the first appearance of the first human beings. All right, so let's say 80,000 years ago, this will be thousands. 80,000 years ago, we leave Africa, By 20,000 years, we've inhabited or begun to inhabit North and South America. 12,000 years ago, Neolithic Revolution. Now, between the first appearance of human beings and the Neolithic Revolution, we have about 140,000 years. 140,000 years, give or take a few thousand years, right? But that's a long time, 140,000 years. I bring this up because I want to show you what else the Neolithic Revolution does, how else it changes our life. So, this is the Neolithic Revolution, 12,000 years ago. By about 5,000 years, we're building the ancient superstructures, the pyramids of Giza, from about 5,000 to 3,000. So we'll do 5 to 3. We're building the ancient superstructures, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, right? These magnificent ancient structures of the pyramids in South America. Okay, by, let's say, beginning around 3,000 years ago, you have the beginning of the Egyptian Empire. You also have civilization emerge in Mesopotamia, in the Indus River Valley, in China along the Yellow River. So we go from 140,000 years to reach the domestication of plants and animals. So 140,000 years between 200,000 and 12,000. And then we only have roughly 5,000 years between the Neolithic Revolution and the construction and the beginning of these ancient civilizations. So this is something else that the Neolithic Revolution does. Not only does it change our basic lifestyle, but the Neolithic Revolution is also providing the building blocks for civilization. The Neolithic Revolution makes civilization possible. Why? Because a more stable food supply leads to a stronger food supply, which eventually leads to surplus. Surplus always leads to an increase in population. People have more food, therefore they can make more children. Right? You can support more children with more food. Population starts to increase as a result of a more stable food supply. With an increase in population, you have a more complex village. More people, not everyone can be a farmer, so people are searching out for different jobs. Complexity leads to civilization, and civilization is the great accelerator of change. So keep in mind, so the Neolithic Revolution, it changes our basic lifestyle, but it also lays the building blocks for civilization. It creates a fundamental shift in how we live, in the manner in which we live. All right, hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.